Okay, welcome Singer clients and Gupta Enterprise clients. Again, 2 weeks in a row, live guests on our webinar. And I was just telling Dave, this is Dave Klein of
Hey,
PayDC.
everybody.
Thank you very, very much for being with us. Dave is an insurance compliance specialist. And I'll read his bio in a second, but I was just telling him when I realized it was 2 o'clock and we needed to begin that I'm excited for this. And, you know, a lot of insurance compliance and audits and billing, it's not something that usually excites most people. It does me, man. I like doing things right. I like being compliant. I like doing everything by the letter of the law. And that's what Dave helps you do. So without further ado, go ahead, Jess, go ahead and read Dave's bio for us, please.
Dave Klein is the co-founder of PayDC, a web-based practice management EHR system that focuses on getting providers paid. He is a certified professional coder and certified medical auditor through the American Academy of Professional Coders, and is certified in healthcare compliance through the Healthcare Compliance Board. His expertise in coding and compliance consulting stretches over 24 years in the healthcare arena. He is also the founder and president of DK Coding and Compliance, and a healthcare consulting firm that focuses on audit defense, education, compliance, and reimbursement issues.
Thank you very much. Very impressive. And you know what? His reputation precedes him. If you are in the healthcare profession, especially in the chiropractic profession or definitely alternative healthcare, you know Dave is a national speaker and has helped me and many of my colleagues stay clean. So again, Dave, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Raj, and thanks for everybody who's attending the webinar. It's great to be here.
In addition, Dave is going to be appearing this weekend live at Gupta Enterprises in Elizabeth, New Jersey by Newark Airport, the Hilton, from 9 to 5. So that's this coming Saturday, the 11th. So if you've got questions and we weren't able to get to them, please come in person to see Dave. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he'll be speaking and taking everyone's questions, and that is going to be awesome. So, Dave, what are the top 3 ways that providers can prevent themselves from getting audited?
You know, I think that there's a lot of providers. The first way, from my perspective, is having the right information, knowing what the rules are. I see so many providers that talk to their friends and colleagues or hear a sales rep and say, hey, you should be using this code, or I've got this great device and it reimburses like this, and you know, I'm getting this much money. And you know, there's a little law called HIPAA that I'm sure everybody's heard of. And that law in 2001 adopted all the codes and their definitions as federal law. So you have to go to the right sources. If someone tells you to do something or how to code something, say, where are you getting that information from? And if they can't provide you with the valid source like the AMA CPT code book, an opinion by the AMA, a Medicare guideline, or a payer guideline, then I would not necessarily follow that. So you got to know the rules to the best of your ability. The second thing that I think you need to do is you need to understand where you stand. I was just talking in a different webinar, you know, just an hour ago, and you know, it really comes down to your profile. I think that healthcare is one of the only industries where profiling is legal, and you have to know what your profile says. So you got to know the rules, and you got to know where you stand, because what payers do these days is they take what you do, compare it to your peers, and if you stand out by more than 50%, guess what? They're going to have a look. So knowing where you stand is very important. There's a lot of resources out there. A bunch of them I'll share this weekend for you as to what you need to do. And the third thing is you need to do everything you can do to protect your practice. And one of the things that I recommend is a risk analysis. Take a look at where you stand. Understand how you look and to the payers. You know, you got to know the rules, you got to know where you stand, but you also want to see, okay, what does my profile say? How am I coding? Am I using modifiers too much? Am I doing this? And get a professional to help you with that review, and it just gives you, as a practice owner, peace of mind. Very, very important.
You know, Dave, something to add to that, because I've done several self audits in my office over the last 15, 16 years. And one of the results that I heard, you know, most docs think that they are not raising red flags because they're not overutilizing, but you can get red flagged for underutilization. So I found out through a self audit that I was not billing enough 98941s in comparison to a 98940. I was underbilling, and underbilling is just as culpable to raise red flags as over billing. So is that true? Do you find that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Medicare, Medicare publishes usage by providers, and 61% of the time, at least in 2015, providers are expected to bill a 98941. 7% they're expected to bill a 98942. That's what the data says. And then the remaining balance is the 98940. So yeah, you're expected to do that. It's the same for office visits. So for example, a lot of providers like to downcode their E&M service, thinking, oh, I'm going to fly under the radar by billing a low level. Well, what they don't understand is when they bill a low level, they actually indicate to the payer that, hey, this problem is really self-resolving, should be taken care of in a few visits, but then they go on to see the patient 10, 15 more times. It contradicts itself. So the level of service needs to be congruent with the nature of the condition that the patient presents with. So undercoding it can be just as dangerous as overcoding. One of the things right now I'm seeing mostly right now is overutilization of modifiers. And not so much that you're using it with the code that's properly appended to, but it's using it on codes that it's not even necessary. Adding on a modifier just in case, that is right now probably the biggest issue I'm seeing.
Gotcha. Yeah. So along those lines, what about coding errors? What do you see is the biggest coding error that triggers audits?
Well, you know, there's the usual stuff where you've got, if you're a chiropractic office, you're billing manual therapy and CMT, you know, very frequently or almost every visit. That, of course, is a profile issue. Another one would be utilizing office visits too frequently. There's certain times when you should use it and certain times when you shouldn't use it. But then also, you know, one of the keys, the 59 and 25 modifier, those two modifiers are way overutilized. I mean, look, Medicare created new modifiers to modify the modifier. So it's just, you know, you think about that and it becomes like, okay, maybe that's something I should look at. One example that I like to give is, you know, providers or maybe it's your biller or coder, you know, you got to understand, it's not just a doctor that's doing it. Maybe you have a billing service. Maybe you have a coder that works in your office that's like, oh, I should be adding that 59 modifier to say therapeutic exercise. The only time that you need a modifier on therapeutic exercise is if you're billing group therapy with any frequency, or you have a swimming pool in your office, which I think you do, Raj. So the point though is that you should not be billing adding a 59 modifier to therapeutic exercises 97110 in almost all circumstances, but providers do just in case, and then they get audited.
Dave, here's a question for you. Let's say they're adding too many modifiers, or they're just not speaking the same insurance language as the insurance company. Does that lead to less respect from the insurance company and thus more denied claims?
Yeah, I think what it does is for a profile issue, you know, maybe you're not getting audited, but it certainly tells the payer that you're almost raising your hand and saying, hey,
I don't know what I'm doing.
I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So, you know, either come have a look or, you know, don't pay me because, you know, I don't know either way. And of course, I'm being kind of silly with that, but, you know, it's true. You want to show that you know what you're doing, you know the rules, and that's the first step, is understanding what the rules are, because if you don't, it can get you audited, it can result in you paying back a lot of money, and it can result in a lot of denied claims. I have a provider right now that they have $600,000 in denied claims because they're in prepayment review. And they didn't realize that the payer wants them to resubmit claims because they're adding a modifier when it's not necessary. Simply removing that modifier, resubmitting claims, probably results in, a six-figure reimbursement over a 6-month period of time, which can be huge. So you got to pay attention to that.
Dave, how often do you suggest offices audit themselves, do self-audits?
I like to suggest every quarter going through it. If you have multiple providers in the office, I would have the providers go through, and if you got multiple providers, one provider audits the other provider, because you might be able to read your own documentation, but someone else may not. So having someone double check that is really important. I would also ensure that the first time you do, you get someone that knows what they're doing, a professional coder, a professional auditor, to go through and get that baseline going. So you can understand, okay, here's what to look for, here's where the issues are. Now go off and do it on your own. And that step is really, really important. But yeah, I'd say every quarter. And if you want a professional come in, once a year, I think is plenty.
Right. We need one. I'll be calling you. So I heard that treatment plans, why is the designation and prescription of a treatment plan so important?
If you think of your documentation as the story of how you cared for a patient, right? That's what every provider does. And what I tell providers is each data service is like a chapter in the book. One of the things that I think is really important for providers to recognize is you're not just going to start writing a book without doing an outline of the story first. And that's your treatment plan. It really discusses, what you want to do, why you want to do it, where you want to do it to, and for how long. A lot of providers, they say, well, I need to see you 3 times a week for 4 weeks with 3 reevals and so on. It's going to cost you X dollars. That's a treatment schedule. The plan really discusses the rationales for care, why you want to do something, and how it's going to occur. And you know what, I think it's going to be this much. And by the way, Medicare, federal law requires that you do one. Every insurance company out there requires that you do it. And the more that patients have to shoulder the cost of care, I think that the patients want to see, hey, what care do I need? And
yes.
Am I going to get better? And then also, how much is it going to cost? Because a treatment plan is a really good way to determine what the cost of care is going to be if it's done correctly. So really important, and it just kind of puts a plan in action, and then hopefully the provider follows a plan.
From my end, Dave, I am finding that a lot of doctors are prescribing to the insurance. And yes.
I disagree with that. I think that I understand why they're doing that, but I think that, you are the provider, and you need to determine what care the patient needs. You're the professional. And that treatment plan should not be based on how much you're going to get paid from a payer. It should be based on the care that the patient needs. And I think it's really important for providers to stick to their guns, let the patient know this is how much is going to be covered by insurance, this is how much is going to be likely to be out of pocket. We'll do our best to keep the cost down, but this is what you need if I'm going to get you better, because otherwise it just starts to snowball and you never get the patient better because you're always trying to chase the insurance dollars, which in my opinion doesn't work. So that's my recommendation.
Absolutely. And I tell all my clients that very same thing, prescribe to the patient. And in many cases, if you're having difficulty doing that, don't look at the insurance. Come up with a prescription plan and treatment plan for the patient that you prescribe, and then look at what their insurance is going to cover and go from there.
That's the last thing. Yeah, I 100% agree.
So Dave, let's say the inevitable happens, or the worst thing possible can happen, and somebody, a doctor listening today, receives an audit. What is the first thing they should do when they're notified that they're getting audited?
Well, there's different types of audits out there. I mean, there's some benign audits that, they're looking for 1 or 2 dates of service. I don't think there's any real huge issue that they need to do there, other than, remember, if your documentation's about telling a story, if you just send in 1 date of service, does that tell a good story? So providers should think about that, maybe send in going back to the most recent reeval, and that tells a better story. But if they get an audit from, say, the special investigative unit, the financial investigative unit, or some sort of investigator sends them a letter, they need to, you need to take a step back. The first thing is you can't panic, okay? Because, I hear a lot of providers say, oh, I've done something fraudulent, I'm going to jail. That's not the case.
Right.
Did you know that the most profitable center in an insurance company, one of the most profitable center, is their investigation unit? For every dollar they spend, they're getting back up to $17. So it's business. So the first thing you got to recognize is that it's about money, okay? The second thing you need to do is that this is not, because it's about money, you need to get someone to help you protect that money. Contact an auditor, contact a coder that is familiar with healthcare and the type of audit you're undergoing. And let's say you called me, Raj, and you said, Dave, I'm getting an audit. I would say, I'm sorry, let's take a look. Don't panic. Let's just see what they're looking at. And by the way, we need to get a healthcare attorney involved. The reason for that is, number one, is that you don't want to hire me directly if I'm reviewing your documentation and data. You want to make sure you have the attorney-client privilege invoked so you can speak freely, and that, I don't want to ever have to testify against a client if, God forbid that were to happen. But the second reason is that I guarantee the insurance companies have attorneys working for them. And there's a lot of laws that you're dealing with. So you want to make sure that you understand what those laws are. I know the laws of coding and documentation, that's a part of it. But an attorney knows the other laws, the rules of reimbursement. If you do come to a settlement, they can ensure that they can't go back to the same dates of service any further, as well as that attorney-client privilege. And then the third thing you want to make sure of is that you recognize, you don't want to just give the request for records to a staff member, say, hey, send that stuff in. It's really important. I mean, you've probably heard of the term, it's all in the presentation. Well, you want to make sure that what you send in tells a good story. And you can't change it, of course. Your documentation is what it is. But there's many times where we can go in and make it, put it in a nice, neat order, make sure that everything's there. Sometimes we even do a little summary of what happened for each patient that tells an overview. You can't date it and pass it off as original documentation, but you can certainly tell a better story through that. So you really have to be very careful, respond to those. And the last thing is you want to do it in a timely fashion because they always have time frames, and the longer you take, the more suspicious it looks.
Let me ask you a question, and you hear this a lot, but is being out of network reduce your liability when being audited?
You know what? No, it does not. A lot of providers say, well, I don't want to be in Medicare because the rules are different, or I don't want to face an audit. It doesn't matter. If you submitted a Medicare claim, you can get under the same security that a provider that's in network. It just means that Medicare pays you directly. You got some crossover. There's some benefits you get as being in network with Medicare. It's the same with other payers. When I managed a large clinic, we had 34 or 36 offices. I received an audit request, and initially I freaked out. I took it personally, and I had my Jerry Maguire moment and freaked out. What I did was I told the auditor that they would have to subpoena the records. We're out of network. We're under no obligation. Well, guess what? That was wrong. And he said, well, he will subpoena the records, and we are under obligation based on state and federal laws and so on and so forth. Right. And I groveled and apologized and ended up, we had to go through the audit. But just because you're out of network, it doesn't matter. You're dealing with third-party benefits. And anytime you deal with third-party benefits where you're treating someone and then someone else is responsible for payment, that means that you have laws and rules and regulations and your state license that you have to abide by. And if you don't follow those rules, including AMA or CPT guidelines and so on, then you're under the same scrutiny as everybody else. Cash-only practices probably have less liability, but they still have some. If their patients can send in a super bill for an HSA account, then they still have liability. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So by the way, I was in the same boat with you. I've been audited where I was like, I'm out of network. I don't have to do anything. And yeah, I had to eat
Not
crow
the
as
case.
well. Yeah. So, but I will tell you this, and I have a couple of questions for you from some of my colleagues that had texted in and wanted to take advantage of your wealth of knowledge. But before I do so, I will share something personally, which I've shared with you in the past, which is I've been audited several times. And like you say, the first time I was audited, I was hurt.
Yeah.
Like it felt
Take it
like
personally. Yeah.
like, it's a bruise to your integrity. Me always putting integrity and ethics first. I was hurt and then angry. But then I realized, of course, maybe not after my first one, but after my second, that it is about money and it is about triggering red flags. And even if so for instance, I have a colleague I know that bills 98942 predominantly because it's part of his technique. His technique is and he was audited because of the number of 98942s that he was providing in relation to 98941s and 40s, like we were speaking earlier. And the audit went fine. I mean, because he didn't do anything wrong. It was he had the documentation. The most important thing that I've ever learned from you is telling the story. And as long as they come knocking, and inevitably they will, and it is not personal. It's simply a roll of the dice. It's part of the game. It's part of doing business in the healthcare industry. Just be ready. And how you get ready is by hiring Dave to come in and self-audit. So I've been through several audits, and I've never worried. And listen, was I jumping up and clicking my heels? No, but I will tell you that I have a tremendous history of coming out the other side. Not only not paying the insurance company anything in the post-payment audit, but actually having them release my claims and pay me. That security comes from self-auditing with pay DC like.
Having that baseline audit it's like a mini insurance policy. Now, you might have to pay a few bucks and so on, but you're going to know where you stand and what the risks are, and going into it with that information can be very powerful and helpful. Again, you're running a business, you need to know where you stand, and I think that's really critical.
Dave, in your opinion, do you think one of the worst things that you can do is try to pay the insurance company to go away? In other words, knowing that I see a lot of docs just flip out, like you say. They get totally nervous. They can't sleep at night because they think that they're going to jail for fraud. When in actuality, that's exactly where the insurance company wants them. And like you say, this is the most profitable department of the insurance company, is just asking doctors for money, making them scared and having them pay.
Yeah, that's probably the third thing. I neglected to say this, but getting an attorney involved with you. Now, it costs you a couple bucks, but it tells the payer you're not messing around, that you can't be pushed around. Rolling over and just paying the money, well, guess what? They're going to know that you did that, and they're going to come back later on. And I've had many providers come to me that have said that. And having an attorney involved that knows what they're doing, of course, is going to help you combat that. And in fact, a lot of payers actually prefer dealing with attorneys, at least from some of the auditors that I've spoken to, because they know that it's not going to be, they're not going to be messed with, that everything's going to be clear, and that everything's going to be handled in a nice, professional way. And then that attorney can also create that kind of that agreement at the end that says, hey, you can't come back to any of these dates of service that were previously reviewed, and that limits that if you just handle it by yourself. So you want to make sure that you have an attorney involved in that. I think that becomes very prevalent. Don't just roll over, because when we're involved in audits, probably, I would say, now you can't quote me on this, although you're quoting me right now because you're recording, but I would say probably when we're involved in audits, reduction is 50 cents on the dollar. So just by being involved and showing, the doctor, one of the things we also do is say, hey, we're going to take some proactive steps, and here's some things we're going to do. And payers can see that. Again, you got a profile, they can see exactly what changes you make, and it becomes very powerful and helpful for that provider.
Also, do you think that you're not pushed around as much by the auditors when you have an attorney?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay, I got my phone is lighting up. I got questions left, right, and sideways.
Okay.
Let's see. Here we go. Will billing the same service raise red flags for insurance companies?
Well, look, I think if you bill every patient the same way every time, and I think that can cause red flag. That being said, chiropractic, physical medicine is very repetitive in nature. Although you want to be careful, though, what I see is the same diagnoses always being used as well. That gets dangerous. Patients come in, they have different conditions. You should really try and make sure that your diagnosis hierarchy is true and that it evolves over time. And sure, you're gonna provide much of the same service, but if every patient's getting CMT, stim, ultrasound, and manual therapy for 8 weeks every time, that will definitely cause red flags. Try and transition that patient from passive care, getting them out of pain relief in the beginning, on into active care where they're getting more actively involved, like exercise and so on. That's what I would try and do.
And that's what I preach as well. So I've been told that you really only want to do passive modalities for the first 8 to 12 visits, and then
active. Absolutely. One of the things I'm going to go over in the seminar on Saturday is I'm going to actually pull up Medicare guidelines that actually provide for each code how many visits they would expect to see. And if you go more than that, they'll actually, they tell you which codes they're going to look at if you go over that number. So yeah, that's really important to understand.
So one of my colleagues asked, it was kind of just short statements, but kinesiotaping, billing kinesiotaping?
Okay, well, that would be done, if you read some of the AMA guidelines, they actually state that that kinesiology taping is more of a therapeutic procedure than it is a strapping. So you shouldn't use the casting and strapping codes unless you're trying to immobilize a joint. Kinesiology tape is really for therapeutic procedure, allowing for movement. So the AMA has actually said therapeutic exercise is probably the most common or the best code to use for that, where you're going through, you're showing the patient how to move and so on. You do have to spend the appropriate amount of time. Another one for occupational therapists would be more of neuromuscular reeducation. I don't think DC should be using the 97112 as much, but those are the 2 codes that the AMA recommends.
That's awesome. 97110. I didn't realize that. That makes sense. How about range of motion testing?
Range of motion testing, most of the time that's going to be part of the E&M service, your office visit. However, if you have a patient or you got a workers' comp or PI injury where the attorney's looking for specific measurements when it comes to range of motion, and you're using like a JTEC or something like that, an electronic device, then you could use the 95 series or 95859 and 957. I'd have to look up the specific codes. There's range of motion and muscle testing, those 2 codes that you could use. There's also physical performance test, 97550. But those are going to be the exception, not the rule. Payers have a saying, most cost-effective, least costly setting. They don't want to pay for extra range of motion and muscle testing. A lot of salespeople say, oh, you got to have it and this and that. If an attorney wants it, then you got to do it. But most of the time, your standard goniometer is going to work. They want to get a general feel and see that that patient's progressing. So don't get too caught up in like the electronic range of motion and muscle testing, in my opinion. We actually, the practice I did, we had a van that had those devices built in, and we went around. That was one of the reasons for that audit that I discussed with you. We ended up having to pay a lot of money back on those devices just because they said they weren't medically necessary.
In my experience, I'm not sure whether it's the range of motion or the muscle testing. I know they pay one of the codes and not the other. And they only will pay those codes when no other service is provided on that day.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a
that's
separate visit.
for the most part, you're correct. The times that I like using it, again, when an attorney's requesting it, you're trying to win a case and you need to prove specific ranges of motion or strength. The other time that I recommend using it is maybe have a patient that's embellishing, or you think they're not really being truthful with you, and you can run them through that, because then it's more scientifically valid. But for your average, John Doe, I would not recommend it. It will flag you and create undue scrutiny for you in your practice.
He wrote down MMT codes. Maybe he needs evaluation and management codes.
That manual muscle therapy, something like that. Could that be one of those?
Yes.
MMT, maybe that's myofascial release, or something along that lines. But that would be 97140, like your active release, myofascial release, trigger point therapy, manual lymphatic drainage, stuff like that.
Do you think that the 97140 is overutilized, or the modifier that's attached to it, the 59?
I think it can be in certain situations. I also think that payers over scrutinize it. I think maybe in the past that it was overutilized, and now they way over scrutinize it. I disagree with that. I also disagree with the stance that the payers take, that it should bundle with your CMT if it's done to the same region. Medicare actually says separate structure, not region, which is different in my opinion. That being said, you can be conservative where you adjust the neck, don't do manual therapy to the neck or the muscles that insert or end in the neck. But some providers say, well, it's, the muscle is different than the bone, so I'm going to be aggressive. You just want to, realize that the more aggressive you are, the more likely you are to be scrutinized.
Gotcha. I got a question here about ADL codes.
Okay. Activities of daily living.
ADL codes.
There really isn't any ADL codes. I mean, a lot of people say 97535, which is self-care home management training, but that's really to help a patient manage his or her injury at home and avoid a secondary injury. If you're having a patient do stretching and strengthening and range of motion and those things at home, that's really therapeutic exercise. If you instruct them how to do that, and the therapeutic procedure codes are based on what outcome you're trying to accomplish. So I'm trying to tell a patient, hey, you need to stretch so become more flexible and increase your range of motion, and show them how to do it, and maybe give them a sheet to do at home. Guess what? You bill that as therapeutic exercise 97110. But if I'm telling a patient with, let's say they've got a disc herniation and they got a hot disc, and you want to make sure that they don't re-injure that disc, so you instruct them on how to get out of bed, maybe how to towel off and how to walk, how to sit up, that would be 97535. But that's probably not as often used as a therapeutic exercise.
Gotcha. That's a good explanation, actually. I didn't even realize I could be billing that. I guess so. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Often, but
I think it's important to understand that, when you do that, when you give those patient home exercises, it tells a better story. It increases your profile, because that's an active code, and it shows that the patient is getting actively involved in their care, as opposed to modalities like STIM and traction and ultrasound, where they're just passively receiving it. So
I love it. You're showing the progress, and you're adding to the story. It's just another chapter.
100%. There's
Towards the end
stories
of
on the claim form as well. Stories on the claim form as well.
Awesome. Okay, one more question. They keep coming in, but this is what I'm going to suggest that those of you that don't have your questions answered today is come Saturday. You'll have Dave there. You can ask him all the questions you want.
That's right.
I greatly appreciate, Dave, if their question hasn't been answered today, and if they are unable for some reason, I don't know what would keep them from coming, but if they can't come this Saturday, how would they get in touch with you?
Just shoot me an email, dave@paydc.com. You can just dave@paydc.com. Shoot me an email. I'll be happy to answer your questions. I'll tell you about, compliance plans and how a risk analysis can help. And I can also share with you, if you're looking for an EHR, I've got PayDC. You can check us out at paydc.com is the EHR that I have. But yeah, shoot me an email. Be happy to answer any questions, and do what I can to help you out.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. So last question, I'll let you go. I appreciate your time again. This is a little obscure question, but it's a good one nonetheless. What happens if the audit only involves a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000?
Gotcha.
Do you get the attorney involved at that point?
No, if it's a small audit, I would not get too worried about it. Those are kind of a benign audits where they're just looking for, maybe the patient didn't have benefits, or, hey, we think you coded this one wrong, it should be this. That's okay. I wouldn't worry about getting an attorney involved, because the attorney is and coding is going to cost you a few $1,000s there. So, no, I mean, maybe you have a quick question, you want to shoot me an email and say, hey, this is the premise of the audit, what do you think? I think that's fine. I only really get attorneys involved where if I'm looking at your records and analyzing them, and then speaking with you about it, or creating some sort of report that could be used against you later. You don't want that getting out there. You should be able to have that information protected, and that's where an attorney should really be involved. The worst thing you have to do with me is, I have service agreements for just basic coding questions and review, but also I get you to sign a HIPAA business associate agreement, so making sure to protect your patient information, because that's really important.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks again. Listen, one more plug out there, one for you and then one for Cairo Secure, which is my malpractice carrier. And the reason why I plug them so much is, I don't know if you know this, Dave, but they cover attorney fees. Yep.
I'm on many panels. So that's one of the things that I actually go over on Saturday is, having audit insurance. Now, it's not going to pay what you owe back if you do owe back, but it will pay for your defense. And one of the things that a lot of providers do is they kind of roll over because they don't have the money to spend to defend their position. If you can take that out of the equation, very big. And yeah, I was just working on a case on behalf of an insurance company. I do a lot of that work.
All right, so it's paydc.com.
Yep, Dave at PayDC is my email. Shoot me an email. And I'm looking forward to this weekend. And thanks so much, Raj, for inviting me. And thanks everybody for being on the call here today.
Dave Klein, you the man. Thanks so much for keeping us all safe. I greatly appreciate you coming on tonight, and we'll see you this weekend.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again.
Take care.